And I'm James Donlin. We'd also like to introduce, back there in the darkness, behind our faces, Michael Diaz, who is the wizard behind the curtain with all the buttons and wires and screwdrivers. He's the one that makes this go. We're very indebted to Michael. Today, we have a great guest, someone that's been working a long time in theater, and the physical side of her work is very important. That's where she was born as an artist, as a professional artist. Let me read you something about our guest before we invite her in.
Who is it?
Marguerite Mathews.
Yeah.
Marguerite Mathews is founder and co-artistic director with Greg Gathers of Pontine Theater, located in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Created in 1977, specializing in small, intimate chamber performances using gestural theater, puppetry, toy theater, and storytelling, Pontine has presented over 50 original works in hundreds of New England communities, performing in non-traditional spaces, senior centers, art centers, libraries, and museums. Marguerite has been president of the National Movement Theater Association, editor of Movement Theater Quarterly, panelist at the National Endowment for the Arts, is a two-term New Hampshire Artist Laureate, and was presented with the Lottie Jacoby Living Treasure Award at the 2013 New Hampshire Governor's Arts Awards. The word pontine is derived from the Latin pontus, a bridge. In psychology, pontine is a process, a connection activated in sleep, a bridge over which dream images travel. Let's welcome Marguerite Mathews.
Hello.
Hello, Marguerite. Hello.
Thanks so much for inviting me to join you.
Oh, we're excited. You've been working as long as I have in physical theater, which is probably 50 years or more. I mean, that's how long I've been doing it. So we've seen a lot and we've been a lot of places, and we're so excited to talk to you about your thoughts on your career and the art of mime and physical theater.
So, Marguerite, we always start out with a question about how an artist prepares. What do they do right before they go out on stage? So you've performed all over for all different size audiences and different types of venues for different age groups. And have you developed as an artist, as a performer, something that you do right before you go on stage? Do you have a little something you say to yourself right before you step into the spotlight?
No, I don't. I have tried many different things, and I feel as though I distract myself through doing that. And the thing that works best for me is to try to relax, to try and just like head roll, sort of relax my mind too. Early on, I would try to run through things in my mind, to think, all right, do I remember this? Do I remember that? Then this happened, then this happens. And when I got out, it was like my mind was racing too much. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I have to just let it go so that when I walk on the stage, I have that neutrality to begin with.
Yeah. What when you first step on, or the lights come up, where you step on it, what feeling do you have next, after that relaxation moment?
I think it's a feeling of presence. Mm. The idea that you're connecting with an audience, that you're present with them, so that there's a beat before something really happens, that you're kind of opening yourself to the situation you find yourself.
Yeah.
When you perform, do you usually arrange it so that you can see the audience, or is the audience dark?
Usually, because we work in alternative spaces, we don't have a lot of control over lighting. And so most of the time, the audience is visible to us. And that's even true. Well, that's even true here in our space. Just because the space is so intimate, it doesn't have the distance that you would need to. So whatever lighting is on the stage spills over onto the audience somewhat.
So
Now I see those chairs.
Connection?
Yeah. I see those chairs back there, the audience in this great space that we'll talk about a little later. But the people in those chairs or on the floor or in the corners when you step on stage, who are those people to you? What is that force out there? Are they friends? Are they, I don't mean friends, like with your relationships, but are they, what body is that? How do you perceive the audience as a performer?
Well, in this case, it really is my friends. I've been performing for this audience or variations of this audience for over 4 decades. And some of my audience members have been with me for that whole time.
Wow.
Some of them are gone now, of course, and so there's constantly the nurturing of new audience members to come in. But it's a small, intimate group. Most of the time, like we just finished presenting another guest artist this last weekend. And so when I'm not on stage, I'm the one who's welcoming people in the lobby and getting people seated. And most of the people I know by first name.
So they are friends. I mean, it's like a very intimate, very special circumstance that you're setting up.
It's a special art form that we are practicing now. It's a special audience that really wants to be submerged in that kind of experience, I find. And certainly when we're on tour, it's not so much the case that people are that. But when we're on tour, we're very often like at a library, we're at a senior center, someplace that's home for the audience. So even though they're not particular friends to us, they're in a familiar space to them. So they're not coming into, a very large theater that feels like something ritualistic. Instead, it feels homey. And that's certainly the connection we try to make with our audience.
Talk to us a little bit about that. You said that's the special kind of theater we're doing now. Go a little bit further with that. Like how do you describe what you're doing? How have you come to this, and what value do you find in the kind of work that you're doing now?
And it sounds also like your definition of the art form has to do with this relationship with the audience and their desire to be a part of it.
I think that's true. One of the things that really struck me from my studies with Ducreux is how much he felt that the actor was the center of the theatrical experience. And for me, that feels not only on the stage, but everything to do with the connection with your audience, everything to do with welcoming them as a human being into your space, of trying to make connections in any way that you can. We now work very often with local history as a subject matter in our work. Early on, we found that the kind of abstract movement pattern things that we were working with from my early years after studying with Ducreux were incredibly foreign to people and felt distant to them. And over the years, I have tried to use unconventional staging techniques to tell familiar stories. So there is naturally here in New England a regard for history. There's a natural regard for place. And we have been mining unknown artists and unknown writers, from unknown painters from centuries past, and have tried to bring some of their work to life on stage. But we're using means that are unconventional. So we're using gestural theater. We're using sometimes mask, maybe the arte mask. Sometimes we're using puppetry. to tell some of these stories.
So just going back to the character of the performance, it really does feel like you're the host of a great meal. You're serving a feast to somebody, to the people from the neighborhood, and you're very, you're seating them, you're inviting them to your house, the fire might be burning, it's a very comfortable and very warm environment that you've set up to introduce the techniques of the theater that you're creating.
That's certainly the intention, and I think that I think that was born of the fact that when we first started performing, everything we were doing seemed so abstract to our audiences. And I remember the first time my father saw me perform some of the Decru material. He said to me, "I have no idea what you're doing, but you appear to be doing it very well."
It's interesting because you're centered in New England, and you're using history and a lot of cultural sources from New England, but this kind of theater you're doing really harkens back to the pioneers and the colonists and the settlers in this country, of how they would be together with their musical instruments and their storytelling. And it seems like you're really bringing the ancient, timeless form of theater in the home itself to the contemporary audiences. That's fantastic.
Well, I like the idea of that. I haven't thought of that myself, but that's
it's very similar. Yeah.
But it is true that here in New England, when you think about like all of those musicals about summer stock theater and clam bakes and things are very much present here in New England. I'm not from New England. I'm from the Midwest. So when I first moved here, it was remarkable to me. It feels different here, and people's interests are different. They would support a theater that was full of actors who they knew and they saw at the post office or down at the corner store, but then they start bringing actors in from New York and everybody stops going because they want to know. They want to know the people. And it may be that I'm in a small town and that it's a small town manifestation as well as a New England thing.
Yeah.
But community theater is very big in New England. And the other thing that's very big here is, like, for instance, you probably heard, of Bread and Puppet Theater, right?
Sure.
Right, they're here. And that kind of theater that's kind of homemade, that has a community members in it, that is a little rough around the edges. All of that is of the appropriate taste here in New England.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you mentioned your background with Decru and the centrality of the actor, the body. Do you feel like that is still a part? And to go on, talk about your beginnings. How did you get started, and how did you choose physical theater and mime?
I started college at Michigan State University as a music major. I played clarinet. And I was a complete nervous wreck from the effort of constantly being challenged for my seat, of constantly having sectionals where you were tested. And I was just really a nervous wreck. So the second year I changed and I began doing more Asian studies and then also some theater classes. And I started to really enjoy some of the activities that were happening here that weren't the main stage things, but were kind of on the edges. One of which was a theater of cruelty workshop with two professors, the Raphael, Jay and Bonnie Raphael. And that was a term-long project where we made the costumes, where we learned about Arto. And that was extremely interesting to me. And it was very active, very movement based. And then they also would bring in, because it was an agricultural college, they were very involved with, at that time, culture from Vietnam, from India, from all parts of Asia. And the people who would come to teach would bring their art with them. And they had a professor, C.C. Mehta, from India. And he came and did a term project, which was a staging of Shakuntala. So, a Sanskrit drama, where we were all taught to do the gestures. And we also had a wonderful dance teacher in that program that introduced us to Decru. And
So
so,
that period of time you're talking about, like you and I are probably from the similar generation. Those are the golden years of discovery of the world, and that time period was very, very provocative and very mysterious, and the exploration was amazing. So it doesn't surprise me that you were involved in those kind of things, at that time.
right. It was the late 1960s, early
Exactly.
70s,
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So having seen the crew, I was aware of him and seeing his work. I thought it was very interesting, but I didn't understand at all what it was. After I finished college, I moved out here to New England, and when I moved here, I met someone who actually had just come back from Paris from studying with the crew, and I thought, those films look so old. I assumed he was dead by now. So he said, no, here's his address. You can write, you can go. And so I was able to put money together. And for 2 winters, I was able to go to Paris and live very cheaply.
Yeah, you could in those days.
Rooms, and study with the crew for like a few months every year. And after that, I really didn't feel like I had the wherewithal to survive another winter like that. And so I had heard of Tom Lockhart, who was the crew's protege and who was now at the University of Arkansas. So I wrote him and asked if I could come there because I could work part-time, for the United States. So he invited me to come, and I worked with him at the University of Arkansas for a winter, and became his assistant, not his teaching assistant, his assistant in keeping the company going, because he always had a company. They always were touring. So I was helping him with grant stuff. I was helping him with organizational things. And that's how I learned how to run an organization, is Tom taught me that. Mm-hmm. And then I followed him when he left University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. He went to Valley Studio in Springfield, Wisconsin, and I followed him there. And again, was assisting with administrative things. And I became the second person to do the International Mimes and Pantomimists Human Directory and Resource Directory.
Yeah.
Reed Gilbert was there, was the director of Valley Studio, so I was able to meet him and start to work with him a little bit as well as with Tom. And that was just an incredibly enriching experience.
So this the crew.
When you were doing all this admin work for Tom and for the International Mimes and Pantomimas, what was happening with your own creative life and your own performing and creating?
Well, of course, the crew doesn't want anybody performing while they're studying. He says you need to deconstruct yourself. You cannot be putting yourself before an audience. You need to take this process of deconstructing. And I never really, I was more interested in it intellectually at that point than I was thinking about performing. I was thinking more of like directing or just, it seems such a mysterious thing. You're doing these exercises that are all movement-based, that I couldn't see how all the pieces fit together. I couldn't see how it was a system. And so I kept wanting more to try and put the pieces together and figure out what the system was, to figure out where the beginning was and where the end was of this thing. And I feel like I finally did succeed in kind of putting the whole kind of idea together in my mind of what the crew was doing. And I only ended up performing because I was the only one that was here. And if I wanted to have anything to do with this technique, which I had grown to love very much, I felt like the only way that I could do it was by manifesting it through performance.
So so eventually you departed somewhat, with maybe the essence of the work was still with you, but you were explaining how
I've never departed.
Well, I was going to say it's the backbone of what you do. How do you can you describe how that backbone is still there, yet it might appear in a different body or in a different approach, a different philosophy, or not a philosophy, a different goal maybe than the original pure technique of the crew?
I think it's, I from the inside of it feel that it's there. It's through all of my performance work. but it's invisible, I think, to most people from the outside. It's because I'm moving naturalistically, pretty much naturalistically, although I often get criticism from Stanislavski trained actors that I'm mannered, that my acting style is mannered. But I consider that a compliment. So.
I hear you.
When did you actually form the company Pontine?
1977 is when I started. I started then being in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, full time. I was in a studio space that I shared with some friends, and I began rehearsing. Tom had taught me a piece of his called Table Chair Class, and so it was something that had a beginning, middle, and end that had all the counterweights and everything in it that I could practice. And so I just practiced it. And then I began teaching some classes to other people here in town. I ended up having 2 women who were interested in performing, and the 3 of us were the first manifestation of Pontine Theater. And we were doing things that were highly geometric, had no plotline whatsoever. I
remember photographs from that period. I was going to say it. You were not that far away from Decru in those early years at all. Yeah,
absolutely not. Absolutely not. And then we little by little started adding voice into the work. But again, it was really abstract. It was more like dance. It was more, if you were outside of it, you would think that you were looking at something from like an early modern dance company rather than.
What's the connection between, like you trained as a musician earlier? How could you describe the connection with musicality with Decru, pure Decru? Is there a connection there, or is it different? Is there a different?
It is. When I was doing just straight Stanislavski theater is the method that we learned when I was in college. I really appreciated all the kind of wonderful improv work and the emotional work, but I didn't feel as though it made me a polished actor on stage. I was not very physically strong. I was very girly in everything that I did. I did beauty pageants, and it was extremely girly. And people would say to me, well, you have a very narrow range. You're very sweet. You're very and I, that to me was invisible because that's just who I was. What Decru did for me was give me a range where I could step outside of the kind of life experience I had had up to that point and explore other parts of myself because of the ability to understand how movement expresses. I could construct something in a way that had been impossible for me before.
So Decru is a great influence on you. Now, do you have any other influences that have seeped in there? I mean, one of my thoughts is all artists are derivative of a multitude of the soup of what's out there. Do you have another ingredient that's coming to your work that you could talk about that's important?
Tom Lepart, because Tom Lepart is not Decru. Although he teaches Decru's technique, he's not Decru. And he has his own take on it. And I feel that he's been an incredibly influential person in my life and in my work. Mm-hmm. I had the wonderful opportunity because of the COVID-19 outbreak to study with him again. So he's at Pomona College in Claremont, California. But he had his spring term was online on Zoom. Oh, wow. And I audited his class. So it was 5 days a week for 15 weeks. So I had lots of
that's intense. Yeah, that's
Marguerite, that's so interesting because the reason why this whole Mime radio show evolved was because James is my college teacher of mime, and he had this idea to do Zoom classes too, and it was such a great privilege to study with him again, but also such a a creative juice that I got going back to my roots in mime, and being able to do it even though he's in California and I'm in Chicago.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, it's pretty
I-
amazing.
Amazing. And then this summer he did, usually Tom would be teaching in Europe, but instead he did something from California, again on Zoom, which was an older, more diverse group. So when I was studying with him and he was teaching for the college, it was mostly college age students and me. But
and so what have you add, like you here's Thomas Lebhart and Etienne Decroux, and what have you added to this over the years? So now you're at the Pontine Theater, not the three women doing that particular style years ago, but what miracles and inspirations have come into your mind over the last few decades, I guess we could say?
Well, one of the things that I think is important is that someone who's a really great teacher gives different people different ideas to go in different directions. What I heard from the crew and what I felt like, oh, this is my mission, I'm going out and doing it, is what I'm doing, which is that I felt he was saying, you know, this is what I'm doing. This is the beginning of this art form. This is it in its purest state. And now it will be integrated into theater. So another generation will bring voice to it. Another generation will bring more of the other supporting arts into it, but they will be in control. They'll be the ones who are making decisions rather than having a costumer bury you in clothing that you can't move in.
Yeah.
As actor, you'll be the one who says, no, this doesn't work. You have to do it again. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's the situation we've created here at Pontine. So my partner, Greg, and I started working together. His background is in visual arts, and he was my student. And I would say, I need something that's like this. And he would immediately come in. It would be exactly what I asked for. And over the years, it's kind of become a blending with him. So he also knows the technique. We can talk in those terms. We can talk about what is it that we're moving? Where's it moving from? Where's it moving to? What's the dynamics of it? So that we're able to talk about it from the crew point of view. But at the same time, he's able to enrich the work with these beautiful props and things that he's brought into it. I just want to share this one thing with you. We're going to be doing a Christmas story. And this is a new puppet that he just made.
Wow.
He makes all the costumes.
So there's a link here because Decroux was very much about form and architecture and so forth and geometry. And so that's true with any visual artist. So there's he's an actor. And he and I, as actors, are deciding what do these puppets do? How do they move? What do we need them to do? So we don't get covered by them or buried by them. You know, they're what is that? Is that a wood head?
Yes, it's sculpted wood. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's kind of like a bunraku a little bit. So it's got a control in the back. It's all handmade. So this is what controls the head.
Yeah, there's Marguerite, I'm really impressed.
You see, you're doing mime. You know how to do that,
Right,
so what
right.
it's supposed to do.
It's the same family,
The movement of a puppet is so similar to mime technique. We were talking to Avner about Julie Goel, his wife, who went in from mime into a lot of puppetry, and it's like there's such a related art form.
We presented Julie 3 or 4 times at our theater, because we're just an hour away from Avner and Julie.
Well, what I like, Marguerite, is there's like you yourself and the puppet you just showed. There's a nice sense of elegance and in a very, what should we say, a very grounded way. I think that's. You're combining elegance. I think you're an elegant person. You have just your manner in a good way, but there's this real earthy quality too, that I think that's a good secret that maybe you've untapped of combining these elements,
Well, I do think that there's we don't really go into, we don't really enjoy conventional Western theater for the most part.
Why is that?
The structure of it, the structure that seems so repetitive of like it's a holiday and people get together and there's some sort of secret tension between them and then it explodes and
Yeah.
then it's all dissipated.
A lot of conflict. Yeah.
Well, it's that thing of thesis synthesis, and then a new thesis is grown out of that. So that's like a structure that's inherent in Western thought. Whereas the idea of, like, from an Eastern point of view, I'm a Buddhist. I certainly think that has influenced my work a lot, is the idea of ground seed growth. And the growth becomes the new ground, which receives a seed and then has new growth. So it doesn't have the same boom, thus spake Zarathustra sort of feel to it.
Uh-huh.
It's so interesting, like the history of the original colonies, New England particularly. There is such a sense of this. Well, there's this. Everybody talks about the Puritan ethic that people brought, and the structures and the black and white and the witch trials and all these things. And so you seem to be going in another direction, yet you're located in New Hampshire. It's so interesting here.
Well, it is true. As a matter of fact, that we just presented this woman with a talk that we helped fund the research for, which is about the Native American population right here where our schoolhouse is. On this ground where the schoolhouse was built in 1845 was what was called the Portsmouth Massacre.
Oh.
And it happened in 1696. And it was Native Americans who attacked a little colony of people who lived right on this area of Portsmouth. And houses were burned, people were killed, people were taken captive. And in looking back over that time, we're trying to reanalyze and look at it from the point of view of the Native Americans. So the colonists that in here, they dammed the rivers so they couldn't they couldn't fish anymore.
Wow.
They built sawmills and polluted the water. They fenced off land that had traditionally been where Native Americans planted and harvested and had free reign over. All of those just kept getting more and more aggressively attacked. Down in Massachusetts, this is what was called the bleeding edge of
the bleeding edge. Bleeding edge.
That's right, the bleeding edge of civilization, because it was the Plymouth colony down in Massachusetts that was administering everything that happened up here in Maine and New Hampshire at that time, because these are just frontiers. And they were really putting the screws to people up here to produce more, to send more trees, to cut down more forests. So the whole thing was accelerating in a way that was terrible.
Yeah.
They had attacked Native Americans and sold them into slavery, into sugar plantations, and had kidnapped their children and sold them into slavery. They had taken a bunch of men down to Boston and hung them there.
Yeah.
And so there was this terrible conflict that had been going on all the way through that end of the 17th century. So anyway, so
one of your missions is to tell these stories of Pontine, right? Is to unveil these that's right. Stories.
And try and bring these stories out, and to have discussion with our audiences about them. So we had the historian here who did the research and who did a whole presentation about it, and then discussed with the audience about like how that's going on right now, how we feel threatened by cultures that seem unfamiliar to us.
Do you normally do talkbacks after your performances, or is that depending on the material?
We do, but we do, yes. But yeah. I think that this was something that was especially difficult.
Oh, yeah.
It's especially difficult. So very often we're not dealing with foreign issues like that.
Right.
We're like we've done a presentation or an adaptation of the House of Seven Gables. But one of the reasons I was thinking of this is that some of the people who were involved in these Indian raids that were happening all over this area in the 1690s ended up being the same people who were involved in the Salem witch trials.
Wow.
And there's a professor here who has been looking into the actual names of individual cases of these people who were in hysterics. And there's like post-traumatic stress from
oh my goodness,
fear and having a fear of being on this frontier.
Were you always interested in these issues? Like, did you grow up in a small town in the mid? Are you from Michigan, the state, or nearby?
I was born and raised in Michigan. My family from generations, both my mother and father on both sides, are from West Virginia.
From where? West Virginia?
West Virginia.
Wow.
That's right.
So my question was, have you always been interested in these stories, or did this you became more enlightened?
I became interested in these stories from living here.
Well, and right now, at this point of time in history, it's sort of like all of these things are bubbling up, and they're hard issues to face. Our history is very traumatic, but it's something that we really need to really look.
Oh, it's that time.
It's the gift.
My heart is fluttering. My heart is fluttering.
Oh,
it's time for the gift.
Hey.
Oh my goodness.
I've got my scissors.
Ah, yes. Well, this is your gift from the Mime Museum.
Oh, how nice. By the way, I have the archive of International Mimes and Pantomimes here, and I'm looking for a home for it.
Oh. Wow.
So if anyone has a suitable college connection to house this.
Yeah, interesting.
A mime check to Marguerite Mathews for work done above and beyond as editor of Movement Theater Quarterly, record keeper for National Movement Theater Association. Miss Mathews tossed out this envelope, believing it was empty. Oh my gosh.
So
Whoa!
You have to reach inside the envelope and pull out the mime check, because that's your payment for all the work.
Here it is. It's made worth all the work.
Marguerite, so many years you put in as the editor of the Movement Theater Quarterly, and you were active in the National Movement Theater Association and many other organizations where you're doing, like you already told us about all the admin work that you did for the Mimes and Pantomimes group and for Tom and the background. And I know as a woman artist, often women take on that role of the organizers. And I know in my career, this is often at the expense of promoting your own work. We did 2 mime festivals here in Chicago before it kind of occurred to us that here we are, a trio of women, and we're doing all this work, and we're not even getting to perform. We're just promoting other people. And
Right.
Do you feel like all that work you did, I know it was very valuable to all of us, but do you feel it was worth it?
No, because I think I don't really even feel like it was a choice, because I was here by myself and I was interested in something no one else knew anything about here in New Hampshire. I had to perform, because in order for it to exist here, I was the only one who knew how to do it. So if I moved here, there were 3 other people who could do this, I probably would have been in that situation. I would have been advocating for them. I'd be writing grants for them. But instead, the thing I was interested in intellectually, the only way I could pursue it was by doing it. I really had not planned on being a performer myself.
The magazine itself, the Movement Theater Quarterly, was extremely valuable to me as a young artist coming out, because I could read about all these things that were happening. That was also during a time when there were many more mime festivals across the country. So we were getting news of like things that were coming up. And I know that I actually used the Movement Theater Quarterly as a way for me to be able to go see performances here in Chicago, because as a reviewer that I was writing for the magazine, I could I couldn't afford to go to these shows, but I got the tickets to go. And I also feel like I learned a lot by writing about the art form. I learned by reviewing other people's work, I became a better performer and observer and director. So to me, it was a very valuable.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I agree with you too. I was an on-site reporter for the endowment for years, and I learned so much, things I could never have seen unless I was sent there, by the endowment. Things that I thought, oh, things that I stole and used, things that I thought, oh, phew, I'll never do that.
Well, that's interesting because, I started in 1970, and at that time you had to be your own business person. You had to organize yourself, in order to communicate to the world what you were doing. And you had to, when you went on tour, you had to be very, professional, meaning, the technicians were important. You had to, you couldn't show up, high at the performance or what, so this organizational qualities that you have, I think some of that is born from being a physical theater artist in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, because if you didn't have that, you couldn't survive. If you didn't have the notion of how to with discipline and professionalism present yourself, across the board.
Absolutely. Well, our first name, and actually our legal name still, is New Hampshire Mime Company. And when we started trying to book things like that, of course, they were expecting Marcel. So that we had to say, oh, we're not Marcel. That's not what we do. And every time you would use the word mime, you'd have to say, but no, it's not like that. It's not what you think it is. And which is why we ended up moving away from calling ourselves mime.
I just realized I put these back on the shelf so that people could see it. I think this one is you guys, right?
No.
No?
It isn't.
I can't. I thought I had
the one you just passed is someone we presented, Tom Kaler. That's Tom Kaler from New York City. Yeah, called Men Die Sooner was his.
What year are those, Karen?
Oh, this is from the 90s. Here's the article about Pontine. That's why I had this.
Oh yes, there we are. That's one of our first speaking pieces.
Yeah.
With the Commedia dell'arte style masks.
Yeah. How have how do you address the concept, the process of aging as a performer? Maybe as a woman you might approach it.
I don't go down on the floor anymore. I can't get back up.
So how do you adapt? How do you? The floor doesn't become your friend anymore when you're older.
No. The knees have gone.
How does one adapt through the years? Do you feel as a performer with advanced?
Well, I used to. It's not really unconscious, but just if you're doing this every year, something makes more sense than something else. I don't try to play young people anymore, but very often what we've ended up doing is a style that's very similar, or actually that we took from Our Town by Thornton Wilder, which is the only pre-written play we had ever performed. And we did several tours of Our Town, done with Boom Raku style puppets for all of the main characters. And me and Greg split the role of stage manager. And then the minor parts we played with Commedia dell'arte style masks.
Fantastic.
We had 3 different places that were, the Gibbs house, and then the other household, and then a main street in the center. They were on wheels. We could move them around, put them together to make the graveyard at the end with pictures in frames to represent the graves.
So the mind compensates for the lack of physical, facility. That I would say that these are very advanced, creative choices that you're making.
I'm taking the focus off of me. I am serving toy theater figures. I am serving a world. I am narrating something that I am doing more object, so that it's not just my body on stage. Although the crew would say that, you could play a young girl if you were, a 75-year-old man, but I think he was younger when he thought that might be true. I think when he got to 75, he might have not been thinking the same thing.
Do you feel there's a difference between a woman performer aging and a male? I mean, maybe culturally there's certain expectations that a certain culture might have, but do you feel there's a different road there or a different approach between a male and a female in terms of that's an interesting question that I don't think people have.
In traditional theater, definitely, because you are, it's the same thing. Ducreux always hated so much about like regular film work and things to say. You had to be already what they wanted the character.
Yeah, right.
You were the character, and so he wanted to be able to have neutrality, and you just become these things.
Yeah, you layer.
And your posture, your energy, but certainly that's true in traditional Western theater. But I think for what I do, and I'm sure that there's many other manifestations of this within our field, you are able to put things on and off. So I can play a really young girl because I first start out as like a neutral kind of narrator, and then I can step into a role and I can become the old lady, as I'm doing them, the speaking becomes very different. And then the next time that I need to play this other person, just by picking up the energy and your mood becoming completely different, you can hold it for a second. I wouldn't want to play a whole play that way. But if I'm stepping in and out of parts and I am a narrator that becomes these things and then backs out, it's more like a storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great, some of the great magic of physical theater is that you make the space around you electric. You give to the space, you transform the space around you. And that is it's sometimes it's not only about your heart, it's about what's happening around. Of course, your heart helps you to make decisions, but I think this idea of endowing space with magic and electricity and form and shape and mood, that compensates for this idea of aging. Like the older performers, like you're saying, if they can become neutral and they give the magic to the space, then you're still growing and building regardless of your age.
I think yes. I mean, some of the Butoh performers, the Japanese Butoh, are very, very old people, and they're incredibly vital and engaging. Their presence on stage.
Yeah.
That one of the Ducreux's teachings was filling up with energy. Of having this scale which you're working on to express consciousness or presence, and that I think is something that you use all the way through your life in terms of creating character, where you are on your scale.
Yeah. How do you do your creative process? What do you do to come up with an idea, and how does it start? Do you think about an idea? You draw pictures? Do you talk about it with Greg about what's the next project?
We have changed over the years. It's very, very different than what it used to be. We used to do much more improvisation. In the early years, that's how we developed material. We didn't have anything that was written down, and we would begin by just doing physical improv that then would give you some ideas about struggle or cooperation or shape or form that then you would just pursue little by little. And that's, I think, still a really interesting and valuable way of making work. Over the years, we have become more and more interested, as I said, in history and in the stories of unknown artists in our area. And so we usually start there. We're doing an awful lot of research and reading in order to find these little hidden gems that we want to bring to the stage. And then also, I think because Greg and I now have been working as a duet for so long, we've developed these styles that are workable for us and that we borrow from. So sometimes we'll use masks, sometimes we'll use puppetry, sometimes we use two-dimensional toy theater figures, and we like to mix that up. So another thing we've really gotten into is shadow puppetry. except for what we've been doing, we've been using loose pieces of fabric that have like a quilted pattern on them that the light can go through, and then have a light source that things can float, and then have a frame that you can hang it on, so that it has this kind of wafting feeling, and the images come into form as they settle into the right focus with the light source. That's a new thing for us that we've been playing with. That's has been very satisfying. And
I love your sense of adventure and exploration. Do you teach? Do you impart this? What do you feel your responsibility in that respect for the younger generations at all?
I remember one time I asked about a particular student that Tom had when I was studying with him physically years ago. And he said, well, they've gone on to teach other teachers' lessons.
Say that again. Repeat that.
Because these particular students have gone off to teach lessons to other teachers. So that it's a two-way street. And as DeCruz used to say, there are many wonderful teachers. There's not very many good students.
So do you think of yourself mostly as a student rather than a teacher? Absolutely. I love having Tom teach me again.
I say that a teacher is only as good as their students. Actually, as a teacher, you're continually inspired by what the students bring to the work.
Well, DeCruz was just, for me, he was an outrageous personality.
Yeah,
and lots of people were offended by him, but for me, he was just perfect.
How did you wade through that challenge?
It was no wading. He was providing me clarity. He was providing me, just like I had in music, notes on scale that I could say, okay, now I'm doing this, now I'm that. Okay, just move the head without moving the neck. Nothing else.
Yeah.
And little by little, providing me with a scale, a tone, a whole kind of language of movement that I had not had before. And I ate it up just like pudding. I couldn't get it up.
So you don't offer classes. You would rather keep learning and.
No, I offered classes. As a matter of fact, I thoroughly trained probably 6 to 8 people in my early years who actually went on to their own performance careers. But there's only so many hours in a day, and I used to do a company class every day. When Greg and I started working as kind of a permanent duet, which happened because we ran up a huge deficit, trying to have a larger company. At some point we were 5 of us performing, and trying to tour in this little tiny area with a 5-member company doing something that was a little off the beaten track was very difficult. We went deeply into debt. We had to lay everybody off, and Greg and I ended up deciding we would work as a skeletal crew for a few years and try and pay down the debt so we could keep going and pay the debt off, the 2 of us. And by then we had gotten to the idea where we could develop a lot of stage characters without there being actual people, by puppets and masks and stuff. So we had developed techniques. And once we were at that point, then what I had been doing before was training people to perform with us. And once that was not the case, then it seemed like it was difficult to fit into the day.
So now you're
classes.
You're talking about being in debt, but now I see you're sitting in this beautiful space. Tell us a little bit about the background of the space you're in and what happened. The riches came,
We've had 4 spaces in all in Portsmouth. We have been, things become more expensive. This town is very popular now. Rents are rising like crazy. Expenses are way going up. This little schoolhouse was closed as a school in 1943. And then after that, it just was a city-owned space that people used. So the Girl Scouts met here, and then the Italian American Club was meeting here.
And it was built in 1845, correct? It was
1845 is when it was built. And so by the time that, like, everybody had used it, it was kind of all used up. It was really like ugly carpet on the floor.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It was like a drop ceiling. It was really ugly looking, and it was available. The city did have a tenant for it. And so we entered into an agreement with them, and we were going to fix it up little by little. And then the city, the building inspector came in and said, "Oh no one can come in here. This is full of lead paint and asbestos and all sorts of horrible stuff." And so the city paid to have all of that removed. So it was right down to the studs. It was just nothing in here. And then we worked with the city to create a budget for making it all new again. And we fundraised 50% of the cost, and the city put in the other 50% of the cost. And now we have a long-term lease on the space. So it's a 10-year lease to begin with, but as long as we are in their good graces and haven't caused any trouble, that's a renewable lease. And so we're feel like we're at home. There's no rent for us.
Well, the term Pontine is important here because, as I said in the little description, that it's the bridge, it's the manifestation of the dream, and it seems that your life as a company and artist, the dreams came to fruition eventually. After all these years, and here you are.
This has been a wonderful time, but as all of us who've done this as our career, little ups and downs, right?
Yeah. The COVID pandemic, for one, like that puts a wrench in some of these plans, with spaces like this.
Oh yeah. We just had our first live performances here in September after 18 months.
Yeah.
So our last season was all taped, all done on Zoom.
Yeah. And are you planning new things or oh wait, what
feel some heat.
What is it, James?
Wait, it's over there. Put it out.
Oh my goodness.
Wait. Drink some water. Oh my gosh. I think it's almost rapid fire time. It's rapid fire time. All right.
There's the heat.
Oh, here it comes.
Oh my
goodness. The heat.
Oh, it's.
Oh no. Okay.
Oh.
I don't know. That's okay.
Marguerite, these are you feel the heat. It's the fire. It's rapid fire question time.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. So this is a little thing we do. I don't know if you've watched any of the other interviews, but it's called rapid fire. I'm going to give you a list of phrases or one word, and you're going to, if you would like to answer with a word association as quickly as you can. This is all very positive and very, very educational for the younger viewers to hear the elders talk like this. Okay. So, so for example, if I say spotlight, you would say, what would you say?
I don't know. I'm overthinking it. I can tell. I'm a complete blank for spotlight. Give me another one.
Okay. We'll ease into this.
All right.
Hands. You can also do it physically if you'd like, or at the same time. Yeah.
No, hands, drawers. Put them
drawers,
in the drawer.
good.
Put them in the drawer. Right.
All right. Eyes.
Seat of the soul.
There you go. We're on to it. Let's go back to spotlight.
Nothing. I got nothing for spotlight.
That's good. All right. Well, that tells me something about your character, which is very good. Fourth wall.
Break it.
Good. Sweat.
Equity. Build
Nice.
strength.
Child.
Nope.
Elder. There it is right there.
Legend.
Legend. Nice.
Beautiful. Props.
Handmade.
Beautiful. Mask.
Expression of truth,
Age.
wisdom,
Failure.
learning,
Critic. Good answer.
problematic.
Good answer. Teacher.
Helper, savior,
Fame.
false,
Language.
articulation,
Mime.
truth,
But pardon?
truth,
Truth. Future.
small.
Beautiful. That's rapid fire. Thank you very much, Marguerite.
Thank you, Marguerite.
That was beautiful. Yeah, there's some very, very thoughtful answers there.
So-
Yeah, great.
I was curious about, are you and Greg actually working on a new material, a new show?
Yes, we are. We're doing a thing for Christmas, a new piece. What I showed you, the puppet, that's brand new,
Yes.
that was just made. It's called Myrrh and Frankincense. And it was written by a woman who lived near here, Hampton Falls, in the mid 1800s, whose name was Alice. And she was a writer who was called Local Colors. So she wrote in dialect. And the New England dialect, which we've learned how to do, even though we're both from the Midwest. But most of the work that we do, that's written work, is written in the Maine or New Hampshire dialect. So it's two old characters who they find later on in their lives that the man had mistakenly proposed to the wrong woman.
Yeah.
And when that woman dies, he comes to the main character in this story, whose name is Susan Peavy, and confesses to her that he had always meant to propose to her. And
this
so
is like-
she, of course, accepts his proposal. And the way she puts it is, she says, "Well, Solon," she says, "it's Christmas morning. Come on over, I'm frying chicken."
Does experience and long years of working, does that help you with a piece like this? Like, in other words, could you have done a piece like this with such truth later or earlier in your performing career? Like, as a young
No.
woman, would you have been able to do this, do you think?
No, I had to do things that were much more structured. I couldn't do something that was as relaxed as that. I needed to have all the sharp angles and the sharp points, everything very clear. That's what I needed to do, just in order to move myself forward along the artistic vision I was pursuing.
So what advice would you give to young performers in this day and age, having been
Technique
there?
is everything. Technique is
Technique.
everything. Go somewhere to a reputable teacher and absorb technique, put the hours in. It will serve you well. It's the bones for your entire career. You know, you'll use them throughout your life.
Good advice.
Don't you feel? Don't you feel?
Yeah.
Technique.
Is there anything in our field of work as mimes and movement and physical theater people, anything in our field that you would like to change? What would you think that would be good for the art? What kind of change would be good for our art form?
I think that if we could get more of us into colleges and universities, would be a way of keeping this teaching alive. Because of course, what happens in my sense, for instance, I'm useless in terms of really handing the technique down to a new generation. And that's what I respect so much about Tom Lebhart. He's continuing to pass that tradition down to, you know, that body of knowledge is not going to dry up because of him. He's going to be pushing that right through, whereas I'm going to be a dead end for that. which I
Why?
think, well,
Why?
because I'm not teaching it. I'm not teaching it.
Yes,
You know,
but
I did
why
early years, but
why do you think it's not being taught in colleges?
well, I think it's like, are we really academic? How many people have pursued a life in academics?
Well, it's
Of
interesting how you know Daniel Stein, of course. So
course.
he has my
He and I
old
doubled together in Paris.
yeah, he has my old job at UC Santa Barbara, University of
Oh,
California, Santa Barbara now. And it's interesting to me that somehow I think DeCrew people continue to, for the most part, do teach, and there's an academic approach to the work, because I think like Thomas and Daniel are two good examples of that. Leonard Pitt, of Leonard Pitt, of course.
oh yes.
So
Of
he
course.
he doesn't teach us as much as he did, but he always loved to teach.
Have you watched his DeCruz scale work on YouTube?
Leonard Pitts?
Wow.
It's a
Oh yeah. He and I were
It's
partners in a studio. Yeah.
clear. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe that's the reason why it fits into academia, is because it is very structured, and maybe that makes it more legitimate as a
I don't know though. It's not really. I don't think you can really teach it in a term. I think.
No.
No, of
and I
course
think-
not.
And I also think that it's a very special student who will abide by that and actually put the hours in.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to become a monk or a nun in a monastery
That's
in some
it.
way, and,
Yes,
or
I
a,
do.
or
Like
a or a
Daniel.
priest. Yeah, and
Daniel got in a big fight with DeCruz because DeCruz found out he was performing
Yeah.
on the side of. Oh.
and also academia is changing now. Having spent so many years of my career teaching in MFA programs, and it's really changing in terms of what the formula in a higher education is very disturbing to me now. And also there is no time. I have one side of me thinks that the arts in the universities will cease to exist at some point, because that there'll be other ways, the private studio like DeCrew and people like that, back in the day, that formula will be the most valid, in the end. Is that where you go to study with a master, but not necessarily in a university, because I think there's a lot of challenges now, and the world is moving so fast that it's almost moving too fast for the proper teaching of an art, or
Well,
nurturing it.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's what I think. Like I know that the class I was taking with Tom, is like a lot of the students weren't even the full class. They were taking like only like maybe 2 days of the 5 days. So that was one of the options they could do.
Yeah.
And how much you can detail the whole thing if you're on like a 15 weeks and everybody's going to be gone, and you wanted to have a beginning, middle, and end. It makes sense to people. So
Yeah, it's interesting. Like something
how
like
much can you
sports.
nitpick into it?
Yeah, like sports. Everybody accept. Oh, in sports, if you want to be an athlete, you have to train every day. Well, if you want to be an actor or a physical theater artist, you have to train every day too.
Every day. Every
That's
day.
Yeah, and
or
I
a
know
musician.
that I know that my background in the philosophy of our school at North Carolina School of the Arts, it was that it wasn't just the verbal or the written play, but the whole body was important in studying, and that kind of training where you're getting the physical training as well as the verbal and voice work.
But the physical training is so cathartic,
Yes.
because it is about your heart too. I mean, oftentimes students will say the voice teacher and the movement teacher are their most special teachers they have, right? But
Right.
there's just no time anymore, in these institutions to provide the proper amount of time. So
Right.
something's going to change, so.
But what I'm finding at my age now, though, is like I now want to start looking into Alexander technique and into Feldenkrais. I took a little bit of a Feldenkrais with Tom's wife, Sally Leppard. That's a specialty that she has. Because what I'm finding is like all of the things that happen as you get older in terms of like ligament and tendon issues, those get addressed in that form.
Let me tell you.
You really are
what's called somatic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What-
you really are an eternal student, Marguerite. You're like, I'm going to study this now, and I'm going to study this.
well,
It's really true.
I'm going to do shadow puppetry next. You know?
how do you feel about legacy? How do you feel about legacy, Marguerite? Like, what do you worry about your legacy, or should an artist worry about that? How do you feel about what you leave after you've gone to the next dimension?
I feel that we've had a wonderful situation here. So because this area is so interested in history, it's interested in current history as well. So we were approached by what's called the Portsmouth Athenaeum in our town, and it's where all of the town archives are for everything. And they came and they went through all of our stuff. They took all of our things away. All of our photographs, all of our posters, all of everything. And they now are digitizing it. If you go to the Portsmouth Athenaeum website, they have a lot of our early work already digitized and available.
Fantastic.
Online. And so we have an archivist, and he's deciding what to keep. And that's that huge, thing off your shoulders, because you don't want to throw everything away, but you don't know where to put it, how to keep it. Where will you store it? And so for them to come to us and say, we'd like to archive you, and then being able to just hand everything over to them.
Well, a lot of us have
blessing.
a lot of us have boxes and boxes of material,
Well,
from
I
the,
still have, as I said,
yeah,
I've
and
been
a lot of
around
us
for
do.
many
So
years.
I wish there could be a place we could put all that. That's not, I wish there really was a mime museum, or not let's call it the mime library. I don't like the word museum, but maybe the mime library,
But I wonder if historical societies where people are would house that kind of stuff. If you were, physically located in a particular place, almost every place has. Maybe not, because I've been living in New England now my whole life. That here, every little town has a historical society.
Yeah.
And they're active and they're archiving and they're interested in history.
Well, I think one of the reasons for that happening today is that there's a lot of problems with the world, like climate change and all kinds of things, and people are starting to go, wow, if we don't start taking care of our planet and learn from the past, we're not going to be here anymore. So perhaps this sense of archiving has a purpose to save the planet. I mean, of course it should, right? Everything that's gone before informs what we're doing now. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that if there will be like some links or something that we can help through this broadcast also link to your archive. That would be fantastic.
I'll forward that link to you if you.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, that's of course the Athenaeum link to our archive here.
Yeah. Wow.
So Marguerite, here's our last question for you. What do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be realized. I want to be able to sit quietly in meditation. I want to be able to breathe in negativity and breathe out something positive that would help people in the world.
Wow.
I want to not have to be concerned about my own little corner of the world.
Well, I think that's what the theater maker does, right? That's what the theater maker does at heart. That's beautiful.
Thank you so much, Marguerite.
Thank you very much. This has been really, really a great conversation.
Thank you.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Mime Radio Show with Marguerite Mathews. See you next time.
Thank you so much.